peg dope, which they don't call it that anymore. It's now peg compound because too many people were getting busted at airports. But peg dope is basically like a lipstick.
They were getting busted?
Yeah, because they thought dope, it was pot.
Oh.
What it is clay.
Well, then I don't want it if it's not pot.
Well, if you have a violin, this is the thing that makes it go, and the peg drops is what makes the peg stop. So you actually need both of those to get the balance right for your violin, and depending on the weather and how much use it gets. So this is what I went to get. This is a uncarved bridge, and when you carve it, we can get the violin over here and you can see it. It ends up being a couple things. One is that you'll see that the holes are much larger, and that means it's going to be a lot lighter. The strings are going to have a lot more energy going into the instrument. The feet have to be carved to be exactly the match the top curve of the instrument. The top curve is really important. Otherwise, if you just left it this tall, the strings would be almost a centimeter over the fingerboard and it wouldn't be playable. So it's something that you got to get the curve just right. There's a lot of little details. And the other thing that is kind of missed most of the time is that when you get a blank piece of wood, it's flat on both sides. But if you look really carefully, it's flat on one side, but it's actually curved on the other. So getting the thickness, and also you can really see it here. The thickness is quite a bit different when you're all done. So it's something that there's a couple hours. There's good luthiers that can do this in about 45 minutes, but it takes me about 3 or 4 hours to get the bridge just right, get all the details and the curve and everything just perfect. Mm-hmm. So we have about 3 millimeters of travel on here, about 4.5, 5 millimeters of travel there, and that's about right for this instrument. So the F-holes have been shaped. That's something that you only find on really fine violins, but it's something that's not hard to do. So I kind of covered the sound post, the bridge, the nut. One thing that I was very careful, this is a new nut. You want to see the strings go over that curve just like as smooth a curve as possible. So if you have a little bit of an elbow, that's what causes your strings to break. So getting that curve just right, so the strings have the smoothest transition from this angle to the peg box. Mm-hmm. That's rather important. So the other thing that this instrument had been taken completely apart because of an accident. It's something that all of the seams along the base have been re-glued. There's quite a few that have always been loose. So even when this was 70 years ago, they hadn't been glued. They hadn't been glued with as much care. So this has all been redone. All the lining has been basically locked down, so there's no possibility of rattles. It's all solidly glued. And it's interesting because when you tapped on the back before, you had kind of a rattly sound, and now it's just a solid violin sound, which is what you would expect from a well-made violin. It's got a lot of character. Got some nice flame maple, and so it's a nice little instrument. So I did want to mention about this. So a lot of instruments have multiple tuning, the fine tuners. That's not necessary if you have good strings. It's something that you actually want the least amount of mass here as possible. In fact, on the old instruments, you'll see that that you get a thinner tail piece, and that's what we have here. So I'm trying to make the amount of weight here as little as possible. And that just allows you to have more energy. You have less resistance for string energy going into the instrument. But hopefully the person playing this will be a more advanced player, and they'll know how to tune the instrument with the pegs rather than with the fine tuner. So it's something that this is set up for an intermediate or advanced player, where you're doing most of the tuning up here, except for the E string, where you just need to make really fine adjustments with the fine tuner. So hopefully this will be a fine instrument. If there's any sort of maintenance issues or anything that starts happening, what I would expect, being Cleveland, is that after a few months, you might have some of the pegs start slipping, and that's where you just need to get a peg drop in there and basically rosin the pegs a little bit.
The peg drops, that was the liquid rosin, right?
Liquid rosin. That's like the brakes. That's so you can move it really smoothly when you want it to move, and you're pushing a little bit when you're tuning it, and then when you finish and get it in where you want it, it'll just stay exactly there. I don't think this is an old violin. This is probably German made from about the 1920s. It's something that I don't think there'll be any more geometry changes to the peg box. So you're not going to have the pegs doing weird things and becoming untrue again. So that's probably never going to happen. And also, all of these pegs have been gone over. It's probably spent over an hour making sure that all these pegs fit exactly the way that they're supposed to fit. So that's something that you'll find on newer instruments, is the pegs are not really seated as well as they should be. But that's not the case with these.
You mean on the imports?
On even on handmade instruments, they don't spend as much time on the pegs. They're really important to being able to tune the instrument. So it's rather important to get the pegs the right shape. But these are in good shape. Like I said, probably in 3 to 6 months, you'll have the strings start, just the tightness of this thing. It might change geometry a little bit. It might be drier in Cleveland than it is here in Pacifica. And the thing is just to get them locked up again with some peg drops. Very easy to do. If you don't feel comfortable with that, find a luthier and just say, hey, I just need those to be so they don't slip as much. But that's something that's probably 3-6 months down the line after a air conditioning dried summer.
Okay.
So other than that, one last thing is I've gone over the fingerboard. The fingerboard has a very flat. It's got the right curve in it for a violin. It's something that it had some bumps and other issues from when it had been played originally. So it's something that it's hopefully you see that it's a little bit shiny. That's a normal thing for fingerboards if you've gone over it. So it's been set up, like I said, set up for being played by a mid professional player, and they should be very happy with this. This is a Laurentis Storini. It says it was made in Cremona in 1793, and that's probably, in fact, it's definitely not the case. This is probably made in Germany in around 1920s. So, and that I can tell just by the way that the wood finish is. I can show you other violins that were made about that same time, and they have this kind of brown finish, and the purfling is not what you would find on a 300-year-old instrument as well. So it is very nice. It's like I said, it was kind of fun to play with. It was fun to fix this thing up. So, and
great.
Glad it'll be in a player.
Fantastic.
Yeah, this along with the picture that you have from 1948 of your grandmother playing it. Is that your mother? Grandmother?
Mother, yeah.
Mother, yeah. So it's a...
But grandmother of the gal who's going to play this.
There you go. So, yeah, if you have any issues, it's something that I'd be happy to answer any questions, and hopefully it'll be a very nice playing instrument. I think, did you get about the chin rests and the other things that I'd recommend for this.
Oh,
Let me go get that.
okay, hang on.
Okay. So I highly recommend getting a Kun folding chin shoulder rest, and it's something that the reason for that is that, and stay away from the pads, is that you want something that'll be on your shoulder and not touch the instrument, because if you play the instrument and your shoulder or a piece of leather or a pad is on the back, it'll actually muffle quite a bit of the sound.
So, so you mean not touch the back of the violin? You touch the sides is okay.
So this is basically holding the instrument by the edges, which allows the vibration of the strings to move not only the top part here, but also to vibrate the bottom part. So it'll have the most loudness. You might not notice that when you're only a few inches away from the instrument, but if you're in the room listening, you would notice that it sounds a lot better when you have a shoulder pad like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I do highly recommend getting this particular kind of shoulder rest here. It also just makes it a little easier to hold it because you have a little more space between your shoulder and your chin, so you're not trying to pinch the instrument between the shoulder and your chin. In fact, I've seen some professionals even have a lifted chin rest, which is kind of silly, but looks funny. The other thing I do recommend is getting a good set of rosin. This is gold and silver, but there's other ones, Piastro, the one I recommended from Diodorio. Just make sure that it's quite fresh. If you see that it starts cracking and shriveling, that means it's started to dry up. And you want your rosin to be very, very sticky, because that makes your bow do the work it needs to do.